The coffee shop hummed with the familiar symphony of urban life. Laptops clicking, conversations flowing, steam hissing from the espresso machine. In the corner booth, Sarah observed it all with the detached fascination of someone who understood human behavior intimately, yet remained perpetually on its periphery. At 32, she possessed the kind of intelligence that intimidated most people before they even realized why they felt uncomfortable in her presence. Sarah's story wasn't unique, though she didn't know it yet. Across the city, in boardrooms and libraries, in art studios and research labs, others like her navigated the complex terrain of modern social life with varying degrees of success and frustration. They shared certain uncommon traits, characteristics that, while potentially valuable, often served as invisible barriers to forming the casual friendships that seem to come so naturally to others. Part 1. The architecture of isolation. The first trait that set people like Sarah apart was their relentless pursuit of authenticity in a world increasingly comfortable with surface-level interactions. While others exchanged pleasantries about weather and weekend plans, Sarah found herself constitutionally unable to engage in what she perceived as meaningless chatter. Her mind craved substance, depth, and genuine connection, qualities that required time and patience to develop, but were often incompatible with the rapid-fire social exchanges that characterized most modern friendships. This authenticity manifested in uncomfortable ways. When colleagues asked how her weekend was, Sarah might respond with a detailed analysis of the philosophical implications of a documentary she'd watched, rather than the expected, "Oh, it was good, thanks for asking." Her inability to code switch between deep and shallow conversation modes left many people feeling either inadequate or exhausted after spending time with her. The second trait was an almost pathological level of self-reliance. People like Sarah had learned early in life that depending on others often led to disappointment. Perhaps it began with parents who were physically present but emotionally unavailable, or with peers who interpreted their intensity as weirdness. Over time, they developed sophisticated internal resources, rich inner worlds, complex thought processes, and the ability to find fulfillment in solitary pursuits. This self-reliance created a paradox. The very strength that allowed them to thrive independently also made them less attractive as friends to those who valued interdependence and mutual support in relationships. When friends called to vent about problems, these individuals often responded with practical solutions rather than emotional validation, not understanding that sometimes people simply wanted to be heard rather than helped. Marcus, a software architect in his late 20s, embodied this trait perfectly. His apartment was a testament to his self-sufficiency. Books lined every wall. A sophisticated sound system filled the space with carefully curated music, and a kitchen stocked with ingredients for elaborate meals he prepared for an audience of one. When his few acquaintances invited him to group dinners, he often declined, not out of antisocial tendencies, but because he genuinely preferred the company of his own thoughts to the energy required to navigate group dynamics. The third trait was an acute sensitivity to authenticity in others, combined with an almost supernatural ability to detect insincerity. This hyper-awareness functioned like a social radar system, immediately identifying when someone was being disingenuous, manipulative, or simply putting on a performance. While this skill proved invaluable in professional settings, allowing them to navigate office politics and identify trustworthy colleagues, it created significant challenges in forming casual friendships. Most social interactions contained elements of performance and white lies that served as social lubricant. When someone said, "We should definitely get coffee soon," people like Sarah knew intuitively whether the invitation was genuine or merely a polite closing to a conversation. Their inability to participate in or ignore these social fictions meant they often appeared rude or overly serious to others. Elena, a museum curator with an encyclopedic knowledge of Renaissance art, found herself constantly disappointed by the gap between what people said and what they meant. At gallery openings, she watched visitors nod appreciatively at paintings while privately checking their phones, and she found herself unable to engage in the expected small talk about the transformative power of art when she could see that most attendees were more interested in the free wine than the exhibitions. The fourth trait was an intense focus on personal growth and self-improvement that created an invisible gulf between them and those content with the status quo. These individuals read voraciously, attended workshops, practiced meditation, learned new skills, and constantly sought to understand themselves and the world more deeply. While admirable, this commitment to growth often made them impatient with friends who seemed satisfied with superficial conversations and repetitive routines. Their bookshelves told the story. Dense philosophical texts sat beside practical guides to productivity, memoirs of extraordinary individuals, and explorations of consciousness and human potential. They approached life with the intensity of researchers studying their most fascinating subject, themselves and their place in the world. This growth orientation created social challenges in multiple ways. First, they often outgrew friends who remained static, finding conversations increasingly one-sided as their interests evolved and deepened. Second, their enthusiasm for self-improvement could come across as judgmental to those who interpreted their commitment to growth as an implicit criticism of others' life choices. James, a marketing executive who spent his evenings studying Stoic philosophy and his weekends hiking alone in the mountains, found that his old college friends no longer knew how to relate to him. While they discussed television shows and celebrity gossip, he wanted to explore questions of meaning, purpose, and how to live a virtuous life in an increasingly complex world. His attempts to steer conversations toward more substantial topics were met with eye rolls and comments about him becoming too serious. The fifth trait was a complex relationship with vulnerability that simultaneously drew people in and pushed them away. These individuals often possessed remarkable emotional intelligence and the ability to see through others' defenses to their core struggles and aspirations. This insight made them valuable confidants. People instinctively trusted them with their deepest concerns and sought their advice during difficult times. However, while they were skilled at helping others process emotions and navigate challenges, they struggled to reciprocate this vulnerability. Years of self-reliance had taught them to process their own difficulties internally, and they found it uncomfortable to burden others with their problems. This emotional asymmetry created relationships where they served as therapists or advisors but rarely received the same level of support in return. The result was a peculiar form of social exhaustion. They attracted people in crisis but repelled those seeking balanced, mutual friendships. Over time, they often found themselves surrounded by individuals who needed something from them but offered little emotional reciprocity. Dr. Rachel Chen, a psychologist who specialized in anxiety disorders, understood this dynamic intimately both professionally and personally. Her friends frequently called her for advice about relationships, career decisions, and family conflicts. But when she faced her own challenges, her father's declining health, her struggles with imposter syndrome in her career, she found herself reluctant to burden others with concerns that felt manageable in comparison to their crises. The sixth trait was an uncomfortable relationship with social hierarchies and group dynamics that made them natural outsiders in most social settings. They possessed an innate ability to see through social posturing, recognize unspoken power structures, and identify the often arbitrary nature of social status. This clarity of perception made them valuable as observers and analysts of human behavior, but terrible at playing the social games necessary for group inclusion. In professional settings, they might be the ones who pointed out that the emperor had no clothes, questioning popular initiatives, identifying flawed reasoning, or challenging assumptions that others accepted without examination. While their insights were often accurate and valuable, their willingness to speak truth to power made them uncomfortable allies for those seeking to advance through conventional means. Their discomfort with hierarchies extended to casual social situations as well. They struggled with the unspoken rules that governed who could speak when, which topics were acceptable, and how to navigate the subtle negotiations of group dynamics. They might interrupt what they saw as meaningless chatter to ask a profound question, or fail to recognize when someone was trying to maintain social dominance through seemingly casual conversation. David, a research scientist studying climate change, found himself increasingly isolated from his departmental colleagues, not because of his scientific work, which was universally respected, but because of his inability to participate in the subtle social rituals that bonded the group. He didn't understand why anyone cared about the department head's golf game, couldn't fake enthusiasm for mandatory team-building exercises, and often asked uncomfortable questions during faculty meetings that others preferred to avoid. The seventh and perhaps most significant trait was their relationship with time and instant gratification, which placed them fundamentally out of step with contemporary social culture. These individuals understood intuitively that anything worthwhile, deep relationships, mastery of skills, personal growth, creative achievement, required sustained effort over long periods. They were willing to plant trees whose shade they might never enjoy, to invest years in developing expertise, and to delay immediate pleasures for long-term fulfillment. This orientation toward delayed gratification created multiple social challenges. In a culture increasingly dominated by instant communication, rapid relationship formation through dating apps, and the expectation of immediate response to messages, their natural pace felt foreign to others. They preferred long, uninterrupted conversations to rapid text exchanges, face-to-face meetings to virtual interactions, and the slow development of trust over time rather than the quick intimacy that characterized many modern friendships. Their relationship with technology reflected this difference. While others use social media to maintain large networks of casual connections, people like Sarah, Marcus, Elena, James, Rachel, and David found these platforms exhausting and ultimately unsatisfying. They craved depth over breadth, quality over quantity, and meaningful interaction over performative social display. These 7 traits created a particular type of person: intellectually curious, emotionally complex, deeply authentic, and often quite lonely. They possessed the capacity for profound friendships, but struggled to find others who shared their values and communication style. Their strength lay not in their ability to fit into existing social structures, but in their commitment to personal integrity and growth, even when that commitment came at the cost of easy social connection. Part 2. The Crucible of Transformation. The second part of their journey often began with a crisis, a moment when the pain of isolation became greater than the fear of vulnerability, or when their carefully constructed self-reliance finally revealed its limitations. For some, it was a professional setback that forced them to confront their need for genuine support. For others, it was a personal loss that shattered their belief in their ability to handle everything alone. Sarah's moment came on a Tuesday afternoon when she received news that her mother had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. As she sat in her car outside the doctor's office, she realized that for the first time in her adult life, she faced a problem that couldn't be solved through research, analysis, or sheer force of will. The disease would progress regardless of her intelligence, and she would need help navigating the emotional and practical challenges ahead. Her first instinct was familiar: to handle it alone, to become an expert on Alzheimer's care, to create systems and structures that would minimize the impact on her life. But as she began researching the disease, she discovered something unexpected. Every resource emphasized the importance of support networks, of sharing the burden with others, of accepting help from friends and family. This revelation forced her to confront an uncomfortable truth about her isolation. She had spent so many years cultivating self-reliance that she had forgotten how to accept assistance from others. When well-meaning acquaintances offered help, her automatic response was to deflect or minimize her needs. She had trained herself to be so competent that others assumed she had everything under control, even when she was drowning. The process of learning to accept help required dismantling beliefs she had held for decades. She had to recognize that her need for control was often a defense mechanism against the vulnerability of depending on others. She had to learn that accepting support wasn't a sign of weakness, but an acknowledgement of the human condition, that we are all interdependent, whether we admit it or not. Marcus faced his reckoning through a different path. His company was acquired by a larger corporation, and the new management structure required skills he had never developed: the ability to collaborate effectively, to build consensus, and to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics. His technical expertise, while still valuable, was no longer sufficient for advancement. He found himself passed over for promotions and gradually marginalized within the organization. For someone who had built their identity around competence and self-sufficiency, this professional stagnation was devastating. Marcus began to realize that his isolation hadn't just cost him friendships. It had limited his professional growth and left him vulnerable in ways he hadn't anticipated. The modern workplace required emotional intelligence and social skills that he had neglected to develop. His journey toward change began with a reluctant admission that he needed to learn skills that didn't come naturally to him. He enrolled in leadership training programs, joined professional organizations, and gradually forced himself into social situations that felt uncomfortable but necessary. The process was exhausting and often discouraging, but it began to reveal the benefits of authentic connection with others. Elena's transformation was triggered by a different kind of crisis: creative stagnation. Despite her vast knowledge of art history and her analytical skills, she found herself unable to create the meaningful exhibition she had dreamed of curating. Her ideas felt academic and lifeless, lacking the emotional resonance that distinguished truly great art from mere intellectual exercise. She began to recognize that her emotional distance from others had created a corresponding distance from her own feelings and intuitions. Her pursuit of objectivity and analytical clarity had served her well in many contexts, but it had also cut her off from the emotional intelligence necessary for creating art that moved people. The vulnerability she had spent years avoiding was exactly what her work was missing. The process of reconnecting with her emotions required her to lower the walls she had built around her inner life. She began attending therapy, not because she was diagnosed with any particular disorder, but because she needed to learn how to access and express the feelings she had spent years suppressing. This emotional exploration gradually transformed not only her personal relationships, but also her approach to her work. James discovered his need for change through physical illness. A stress-related condition forced him to slow down and examine the sustainability of his lifestyle. His pursuit of self-improvement had become another form of isolation, a way of staying busy and focused that prevented him from dealing with his fundamental loneliness. During his recovery, he was forced to accept help from others in ways that challenged his self-image. Friends brought him meals, colleagues covered his responsibilities, and family members provided emotional support. This experience taught him that interdependence wasn't a sign of failure, but a natural part of human existence. The illness also forced him to confront the limitations of purely intellectual approaches to life's challenges. His Stoic philosophy provided valuable frameworks for understanding adversity, but it couldn't replace the healing power of genuine connection with others. He began to understand that his pursuit of strength and self-reliance had been incomplete. True strength included the courage to be vulnerable with others. Dr. Rachel Chen's moment of reckoning came when she realized that her professional success was built on a foundation of personal isolation. Her ability to help others process their emotions was remarkable, but she had never learned to seek the same kind of support for herself. The asymmetry in her relationships had created a pattern where she was always the helper, never the helped. This recognition came during a particularly difficult period when she was dealing with her father's illness, questioning her career direction, and facing her own midlife concerns about meaning and purpose. For the first time, she found herself unable to manage everything internally. The tools that had served her professionally, active listening, empathy, problem-solving, weren't sufficient for her personal challenges. Learning to be vulnerable with others required her to challenge fundamental beliefs about her role in relationships. She had to learn that seeking support wasn't a professional liability but a human necessity. She began opening up to colleagues, joining peer support groups, and gradually allowing others to see her struggles rather than just her competence. David's transformation began when his research team was disbanded due to funding cuts. For the first time in his career, he was forced to collaborate with researchers from different disciplines, each with their own methodologies and communication styles. His direct, sometimes blunt communication style, which had served him well in his specialized field, created conflicts and misunderstandings in this more diverse environment. The crisis forced him to develop skills he had previously dismissed as irrelevant to his work. He had to learn to read social cues, to communicate complex ideas in accessible ways, and to build relationships based on trust and mutual respect rather than just intellectual compatibility. The process was humbling and often frustrating, but it gradually opened up new possibilities for both his work and his personal life. Each of these individuals faced a similar challenge, learning to integrate their natural strengths with the social and emotional skills they had neglected. This integration wasn't about abandoning their authentic selves or conforming to social expectations they found meaningless. Instead, it was about expanding their repertoire of human connection while maintaining the core values and traits that made them unique. The transformation process revealed several important insights. First, their isolation hadn't been entirely chosen. It was often a response to early experiences that taught them to rely on themselves rather than others. Second, their uncommon traits weren't inherently problematic but became limiting when taken to extremes. Third, genuine connection with others didn't require them to sacrifice their authenticity, but rather to express it in more skillful ways. The journey toward change required them to develop what psychologists call social flexibility, the ability to adapt their communication style and behavior to different contexts while maintaining their core identity. They learned to code switch between deep and casual conversation, to offer both practical solutions and emotional support, and to balance their need for growth with acceptance of others' different paces and priorities. This flexibility didn't come easily. It required conscious practice, frequent mistakes, and the willingness to feel awkward and incompetent while learning new skills. They had to develop patience with the slow pace of relationship building and tolerance for the messiness and unpredictability of human emotion. Perhaps most importantly, they began to understand that their desire for deep, meaningful connection wasn't unrealistic or impossible. It just required different strategies than they had been using. Instead of waiting for others to match their level of intensity and authenticity, They learned to create spaces where such connection could develop naturally over time. Part 3. The alchemy of authentic connection. The third phase of their journey involved the delicate art of building genuine relationships while honoring their authentic selves. This wasn't about changing their fundamental nature, but about learning to express their uniqueness in ways that invited connection rather than created distance. They discovered that their uncommon traits, properly channeled, could become sources of extraordinary depth and meaning in relationships. Sarah's breakthrough came when she joined a support group for adult children of parents with dementia. For the first time, she found herself in an environment where emotional intensity was not only accepted but necessary. The group members shared her need for authentic communication. They couldn't afford the luxury of small talk when dealing with such profound loss and change. In this context, her analytical mind became an asset rather than a barrier. She helped other members research treatment options, created systems for managing care responsibilities, and offered the kind of practical support that emerged naturally from her problem-solving orientation. But she also learned to receive similar support from others, gradually becoming comfortable with the vulnerability that authentic relationships required. The key insight was that she didn't need to change her communication style as much as find the right contexts for it. Deep, meaningful conversations weren't impossible in modern life. They just required intentional cultivation and the right conditions. She began hosting monthly gatherings focused on specific topics she cared about: philosophy, personal growth, and current events. These structured conversations created a framework where her natural intensity could flourish while others felt safe to engage at their comfort level. Her authenticity, previously a source of social discomfort, became her greatest strength in building meaningful relationships. People knew they could trust her to be genuine, to offer honest feedback, and to engage with real substance rather than surface pleasantries. While her circle of friends remained smaller than average, the relationships she developed were characterized by unusual depth and mutual support. Marcus discovered that his self-reliance, rather than being a barrier to friendship, could be reframed as a gift he offered to others. His ability to solve problems independently meant that when friends came to him with challenges, they received focused attention rather than someone who was overwhelmed by their own issues. His emotional stability became an anchor point for others during difficult times. The transformation came when he learned to balance his natural independence with intentional interdependence. He began scheduling regular social activities, not because he needed constant company, but because he recognized that relationships required consistent investment. He created structures that honored both his need for solitude and others' need for connection. His apartment, once a fortress of solitude, became a gathering place for small groups of like-minded individuals. His cooking skills, previously enjoyed in isolation, became a way of caring for others. His knowledge and interests, once private pursuits, became topics of shared exploration with friends who appreciated his expertise. The key was learning to see interdependence not as a threat to his autonomy, but as a conscious choice to share his resources with others. When friends needed help with technology, career advice, or simply someone who could listen without judgment, Marcus found fulfillment in being able to contribute meaningfully to their lives. Elena's artistic breakthrough came when she began incorporating the emotional insights gained through her personal relationships into her curatorial work. Her exhibitions took on a new dimension, combining her scholarly knowledge with intuitive understanding of how art affects people emotionally. Her ability to see through surface appearances, previously a source of social isolation, became a valuable tool for helping others discover deeper meanings in artistic works. She learnt that her sensitivity to authenticity could serve as a bridge rather than a barrier in relationships. By modeling genuine expression and creating safe spaces for others to drop their social masks, she attracted people who craved the same depth and honesty she valued. Her art gallery became a gathering place for individuals seeking meaningful cultural experiences beyond entertainment or social status. Her relationships developed around shared exploration of ideas, art, and meaning. Rather than trying to engage in casual social banter, she created contexts where substantive conversation was the norm. Book clubs, artist salons, and discussion groups became her primary social venues, attracting others who shared her values around authentic communication and intellectual curiosity. James discovered that his commitment to personal growth, rather than alienating others, could inspire and support their own development journeys. His philosophical interests became a resource for friends facing life transitions or seeking greater meaning in their work and relationships. His discipline in pursuing self-improvement became a model for others rather than a source of implicit judgment. The transformation occurred when he learned to share his growth process rather than just its results. Instead of presenting himself as someone who had figured everything out, he began opening up about his struggles, questions, and ongoing learning. This vulnerability made his achievements feel accessible rather than intimidating to others. His hiking practice evolved from solitary retreat to shared adventure, as he began inviting others to join him on trails that matched their fitness levels and interests. These outdoor experiences created natural opportunities for the kind of deep conversation he craved, away from the distractions and superficiality of urban social life. His study of Stoic philosophy became a shared exploration with friends who were interested in practical approaches to managing stress and finding meaning in difficult circumstances. Rather than lecturing others about philosophical principles, he began sharing specific practices and inviting others to experiment with approaches that might work for their unique situations. Dr. Rachel Chen's professional and personal lives began to integrate in healthier ways when she learned to model the vulnerability she encouraged in her clients. Her willingness to acknowledge her own struggles and ongoing growth made her more effective as a therapist while also deepening her personal relationships. She began facilitating support groups for professionals in helping fields, creating structured environments where others could practice the kind of mutual support that had been missing from her own life. These groups addressed the unique challenges faced by people whose careers involved caring for others while often neglecting their own emotional needs. Her sensitivity to others' emotions, previously a source of exhaustion, became a conscious skill she could modulate rather than an automatic response she couldn't control. She learned to create boundaries that protected her energy while still being available to support friends and colleagues when they truly needed help. The key insight was recognizing that her helper role didn't have to be one-sided. By creating reciprocal relationships where others could also contribute their unique strengths, she developed a support network that sustained rather than depleted her energy. David's scientific background became a foundation for understanding and improving social dynamics rather than a substitute for them. He began applying research methodologies to his own relationship patterns, treating social skills development as an interesting area of study rather than an impossible challenge. His direct communication style, when combined with genuine curiosity about others' perspectives, became a source of clarity and honesty that many people appreciated. Rather than trying to soften his natural directness, he learned to frame it in terms of care and interest rather than criticism or judgment. His interdisciplinary collaboration skills, hard-won through professional necessity, began to enrich his personal relationships as well. He discovered that the same principles that made scientific collaborations successful, clear communication, shared goals, mutual respect for different expertise, could be applied to friendship and community involvement. These transformations revealed several universal principles about building authentic relationships while honoring uncommon traits. First, the goal wasn't to become more normal, but to find contexts where their natural characteristics could be appreciated and reciprocated. Second, their traits weren't inherently antisocial but required conscious integration with social and emotional skills. They learned that authentic relationship building was itself a skill that could be developed through practice and intention. Like any other area of expertise, it required study, experimentation, feedback, and refinement. Their analytical minds, properly directed, became tools for understanding and improving their social effectiveness. The process taught them that vulnerability and strength weren't opposite but complementary. The courage to be authentic about their struggles and limitations actually enhanced their ability to connect with others, while their natural strengths became gifts they could offer to their communities. Perhaps most importantly, they discovered that their desire for deep, meaningful relationships wasn't selfish or unrealistic. There were others who shared their values around authentic communication, personal growth, and substantive engagement with life's questions. Finding these people required patience and intentionality, but the relationships that resulted were characterized by unusual richness and mutual support. Their friendships, while fewer in number than average, were distinguished by qualities that many people craved but struggled to find: genuine acceptance, intellectual stimulation, emotional support during difficulties, and the kind of loyalty that emerged from truly knowing and appreciating each other's authentic selves. The paradox of their journey was that in learning to connect more effectively with others, they also became more fully themselves. Their uncommon traits, properly expressed and integrated with social awareness, became sources of unique contribution to their communities. They learned that the man or woman who destroys their weak self, not their authentic self, but their defensive, isolated, fearful self, cannot be destroyed by others because they have found the courage to be genuinely known and accepted. Their stories became testaments to the possibility of living authentically while building meaningful connections with others. They proved that it was possible to honor one's unique perspective and values while also participating fully in the human community. The key was learning to see their differences not as barriers to overcome but as gifts to be shared thoughtfully and skillfully. In the end, their journeys revealed that the deepest connections often form between people who have the courage to be authentically themselves, even when that authenticity makes them uncommon. Their friendships became laboratories for exploring what it means to live with integrity, to grow throughout life, and to support each other in becoming the best versions of themselves. The coffee shop where Sarah's story began remained her favorite place to observe human behavior, but now she was no longer just an observer. Her corner booth became a meeting place where friends gathered to share their thoughts on books they'd read, challenges they faced, and dreams they were pursuing. Her intensity and authenticity, once sources of isolation, had become the foundation for relationships that sustained and enriched all participants. Their collective story suggested that perhaps the epidemic of loneliness affecting modern society wasn't just about people becoming more isolated, but about authentic individuals struggling to find their place in increasingly superficial social structures. Their journeys offered hope that it was possible to build genuine community while honoring the full spectrum of human personality and values. The transformation from isolation to connection didn't require abandoning their core selves, but rather learning to express those selves in ways that invited others into relationship. They discovered that their uncommon traits, properly understood and skillfully expressed, weren't obstacles to friendship but foundations for the kind of deep, meaningful connections that enriched life beyond measure. This document explores the complex relationship between personality traits that can lead to social isolation and the journey toward building authentic connections. Through the interwoven stories of 6 individuals, it examines how characteristics that initially create barriers to friendship can, with awareness and skill, become foundations for unusually rich and meaningful relationships. The central thesis: that those who transform their defensive selves while remaining authentically unique cannot be destroyed by external judgment, suggests that true strength comes not from isolation but from the courage to be genuinely known by others.